All right, today, ladies and gentlemen, we will be discussing chapters 23 and 24 of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. As the story finally comes to a conclusion here, Victor Frankenstein goes on his wedding night. Full well know that the last time he had seen the monster, after destroying the pieces of the female monster, the monster made that promise to Victor: "I will be with you on your wedding night." And so, as we move into chapter 23, Victor and Elizabeth have their wedding, and they're going on their wedding night. They're going to this inn on a lake. It should be very romantic, but Victor very well knows, or very well expects, that his monster will be attacking him this evening. So again, it brings us to this final conflict between the two that is described here in chapter 23. They arrive. They arrive at 8 o'clock at night. They're going to this hotel right by the lake. They retire to the inn and contemplate the lovely scenes of the waters, the woods, the mountains, obscured in darkness. The writing here is really quite good. The wind, which had fallen in the south, now rose with great violence in the west. The moon had reached her summit in the heavens and was beginning to descend. Again, the use of the word violence there, kind of as a foreshadowing of what's to come here. The wind is violent. It's a windy night. And Victor here, Victor in the beginning of this, he's going on this walk with Elizabeth. This is their honeymoon night, the night of their wedding. He goes on this kind of romantic walk on the beach, and she's, feeling obviously very amorous towards him, but he's agitated. He's got a gun with him. Imagine you're Elizabeth and like you're on your wedding night and you guys are going for a walk on the beach and Victor's carrying a gun with him. I mean, obviously that might upset you a little bit. As is described here, Elizabeth observed my agitation for some time in timid and fearful silence, but there was something in my glance that communicated terror to her. And trembling, she asked, "What is it that agitates you, my dear Victor? What is it that you fear?" In Victor's reply here, "Oh, peace, peace, my love. This night and all will be safe, but this night is dreadful, very dreadful." That's what a wife wants to hear on the wedding night. Victor's like, "It'll be okay, darling. I just got to get through tonight, and tonight's very dreadful to me. But after I get through tonight, all will be good." Again, she has no idea what he's really referring to here. The very next part here, I passed an hour in the state of mind when suddenly I reflected how fearful the combat which I momentarily expected would be to my wife, and I earnestly entreated her to retire, resolving not to join her until I obtained some knowledge of the situation of my enemy. Victor's like, it hit me, Robert Walton, that, Elizabeth might not like to see me fight a monster to the death. Maybe she doesn't want to see that. And so he says to his wife, "Listen, head upstairs to the room, go get settled in. I just need to do something down here. I need to go fight a monster. And then I'll be up and we'll have our wedding night." And then we have it. She left me and I continued some time walking up and down the passages of the house and inspecting every corner that might afford a retreat to my adversary. But I discovered no trace of him, and I was beginning to conjecture that some fortunate chance had intervened to prevent the execution of his menaces, when suddenly I heard a shrill and dreadful scream. It came from the room into which Elizabeth had retired, and as I heard it, the whole truth rushed into my mind. My arms dropped, the motion of every muscle and fiber was suspended. I could feel the blood trickling in my veins and tingling in the extremities of my limbs. This state lasted but for an instant. The scream was repeated, and I rushed into the room. I guess it should not be surprising that the monster never meant to attack Victor. This entire time, the monster was seeking to attack Elizabeth, and I'm sure if you just think a little critically, you can figure out why that makes sense, why the monster would go after Elizabeth and not after Victor. Victor is fully convinced that the monster means to attack him, so he sends Elizabeth up to the room as he goes looking for the monster, not knowing that the monster is already in the room hiding out. He hears Elizabeth scream. He runs into the room. Great God, why did I not then expire? Why am I here to relate the destruction of the best hope and purest creature on earth? She was there, lifeless and inanimate, thrown across the bed, her head hanging down and her pale, distorted features half covered by her hair. Everywhere I turn, I see the same figure, her bloodless arms and relaxed form flung by the murderer on its bridal bier. Could I behold this and live? Alas, life is obstinate and clings closest where it is most hated. For a moment only did I lose recollection, and I fell senseless to the ground. He runs into the room and discovers Elizabeth's body. She has been strangled, laying out on the bed, on her own bridal bed. Um, she has been strangled. And again, Victor sees this and he falls senseless to the ground. Another example of his fits and fevers. Think about how many times in this text we've seen Victor pass out, fall senseless, fall into one of these madnesses that he does so again here. When I recovered, I found myself surrounded by the people of the inn. Their countenances expressed a breathless horror, but the horrors of others appeared only a mockery. So again, he wakes, he's revived. All of a sudden, other people from the inn have found the body of Elizabeth. They come rushing in. They revive Victor. He runs back into the room. As he runs into the room, I want you to pay close attention to this sentence. I rushed towards her and embraced her with an ardor, but the deadly languor and coldness of the limbs told me that what I now held in my arms had ceased to be the Elizabeth whom I had loved and cherished. Think about that image. Victor runs into the room where Elizabeth's dead body is. He picks her body up into her arms and gives her a hug. And I want you to think critically, is there another point in this text that reminds you of? Think. Is there another moment earlier in the text, him holding his dead wife, should remind you of another moment in this story? And then this. As he's holding her, while I still hung over her in the agony of despair, I happened to look up. The windows of the room had before been darkened, and I felt a kind of panic on seeing the pale yellow light of the moon illuminate the chamber. The shutters had been thrown back, and with a sensation of horror not to be described, I saw, at the open window, a figure most hideous and abhorred. A grin was on the face of the monster. He seemed to jeer as with his fiendish finger he pointed towards the corpse of my wife. I rushed towards the window, drawing a pistol from my bosom. Fired, but he eluded me. Leaped from his station, running with the swiftness of lightning, plunged into the lake. So as Victor's in the room hugging his dead wife, he looks up and there's his monster standing in the window. The monster points at Elizabeth and smiles at him, having gotten his ultimate vengeance. Victor sees it. Victor instantly pulls that gun out that he's been carrying, fires at the monster, misses. The monster jumps from the window down into the lake and runs off. And Victor chases after him here. The report of the pistol brought a crowd into the room. I pointed to the spot where he had disappeared, and we followed with the track with boats. Nets were cast, but in vain. After passing several hours, we returned hopeless. Most of my companions believing it to have been a form conjured by my fancy. After landing, they proceeded to search the country. So when Victor fires that gun in the room, a number of the other people of the inn come running in. Victor points to the window, and everyone goes running out into the night in the search of the monster. They go out and search, but they find nothing. And that line's important where it says, most of my companions believe it to be a form conjured by my fancy. When they return, most people believe Victor's imagining things. Like, there's no monster out there. You're imagining this. Again, it seems somewhat curious that this 8-foot monster seems to be able to move in and out of this hotel, and no one but Victor sees him. But anyways, the monster does escape here. All right. Okay. Here we have it again, the very next paragraph. I fell in a state of utter exhaustion. A film covered my eyes. Here's that motif again we've been talking about Victor's vision being obscured, a film before his eyes. His skin was parched with the heat of fever. Victor is building up a fever. Again, he seems to be delusional here. Again, he is admitted several times into this text to hallucinating. And obviously, he's very agitated here. The death of William, the execution of Justine, the murder of Clerval, and lastly my wife. And even at that moment, I knew not that my remaining friends were safe from the malignity of this fiend. My father might now be writhing under his grasp, and Ernest might be dead at his feet. Victor realizes he's got to return home to Geneva. At this point, all that's left for him is to try to save his remaining family. The monster has obviously made its intentions clear. It's going to go after his family. And so Victor, even though he is delusional and hallucinating everything else, immediately jumps on a horse, or no, he grabs a boat, and starts to make his way back to Geneva. He arrives in Geneva to find that his father and Ernest were still alive, which was good. Let's see here. At least for the moment. He talks about his father here, Alphonse. Cursed, cursed be the fiend that brought misery and gray hairs and doomed him to waste of wretchedness. He could not live under the horrors that were accumulated around him. The springs of existence suddenly gave way. He was unable to rise from his bed. In a few days, he died in my arms. Alphonse does die here. Victor's father dies out of grief. This is all too much for him. The death of William, the execution of Justine, the death of Henry, and now of Elizabeth, who was a daughter to him. This is all too much, and Alphonse dies of grief in his bed, in Victor's arms. And then this. Talk about your unreliable narration piece. What then became of me, I know not. I lost sensation, and the chains and darkness were the only objects that pressed upon me. Sometimes, indeed, I dreamt that I wandered in flowery meadows or the pleasant vales with my friends of youth, but I woke and found myself in a dungeon. Melancholy followed, and by degrees I gained a clear conception of my miseries and situations, and then was released from my prison, for they had called me mad. And during many months, as I understood, a solitary cell had been my habitation. What is being described here, if you don't realize it, Victor's describing an asylum. You got to imagine at this point, Victor is raving. Victor's like, there's a monster out there. I created him. I brought him to life. He's killing my family. I need help in catching him. And people have locked him up. And as he describes here, for several months, he's locked up in this asylum, stark raving mad, entreating people, please help me. There's a monster out there and I need to kill it. And that brings us to chapter 24, the last chapter of the book. Victor is finally released. And at this point in the text, there's only one thing left for Victor, and that's to get vengeance on the monster. I want to remind you that in letter 4 at the beginning of the text, we had talked about that Robert Walton witnesses Victor Frankenstein chasing his monster across the Arctic. And back at that point, I had asked you, what is it that could happen in this text that would cause Victor Frankenstein to be chasing his monster in the way that he is doing so? And I think you now have that answer. All that's left for Victor is to get vengeance on the monster. And so we have the scene in chapter 24, that plays out in chapter 24, where Victor begins to chase the monster. When I quitted Geneva, he leaves his home for the final time. When I quitted Geneva, my first labor was to gain some clue which I might trace the steps of my fiendish enemy. But my plan was unsettled. I wandered many hours in the confines of the town. So he starts to go out and search for the monster. And then we have this. Let me pull it up here. Deep in this grief in the scene, at first excited, quickly gave way to rage and despair. They were dead, and I lived, and their murderer also lived, and to destroy him, I must drag out my weary existence. I knelt on the grass and kissed the earth and cried out. Victor makes this oath here. By the sacred earth on which I kneel, by the shades that wander near me, by the deep and eternal grief that I feel, I swear, and by thee, O night, and the spirits that preside over thee, to pursue the demon who caused this misery until he or I shall perish in mortal conflict. It's better if you say mortal combat. For this purpose, I will preserve my life to execute this dear vengeance, this dear revenge, which I again behold the sun and tread upon the green herbage of the earth, which otherwise should vanish forever. I call upon you, spirits of the dead, on you, wandering ministers of vengeance. This is Shakespearean. I feel like Lady Macbeth here when he's, the wandering ministers of vengeance. He's conjuring up spirits from hell to aid in the conduct of my work. Let me find this monster. So he kneels in the grass outside Geneva, and he's like, I'm going to get that vengeance. Spirits, help me. And as he does so, he is answered. I was answered through the stillness of the night by a loud and fiendish laugh. Somewhere, off in the distance, the monster starts to laugh at him. It rang on my ears with long and heavily, and the mountains re-echoed it. It's echoing off the mountains, this laugh of the monster. I felt as if hell surrounded me with mockery. The laughter died away, and a well-known and abhorred voice, apparently close to my ear, addressed me in an audible whisper. I am satisfied, miserable wretch. You have determined to live, and I am satisfied. And so just as Victor drops to his knees and makes this vow of vengeance, and think about how this is described, the laugh of the monster echoes through the mountains around him, but then he hears the monster's voice, as he describes, apparently close to my ear. Again, this seems very suspicious. The monster's not close to him. The monster's nowhere near him. And yet he hears the monster voice apparently close to his ear. Again, I think we have more hallucinating going on here. And this also, with the monster forcing Victor to live, killing all of his family, killing all of his friends, and forcing Victor to live, is kind of like that idea from Rime of the Ancient Mariner about life and death. If you remember in Rime of the Ancient Mariner, all the other sailors on the boat die. The Ancient Mariner is left alive. He's left alive to live a cursed life, to live a life in death, as if to suggest that if death is too good for Victor, the monster isn't going to kill Victor. He wants him to live with the same agony that Victor caused the monster by abandoning him. And so we start the pursuit. For many months, Victor starts chasing this monster. And, it seems strange to think about, like, there's no way Victor should be able to chase this monster. The monster's bigger, stronger, faster. The monster could easily get away, but the monster doesn't. In fact, throughout this chase scene, and I really do think that this scene here in 24 is some of the best writing in the book. Please take the time to really kind of look through this. When I really think about the talents of Mary Shelley, I think this chapter stands out. As Victor describes this chase scene for months, he's going out, in search of this monster, and the monster never lets Victor catch him, but the monster also never gets too far away. He slows up. He keeps Victor, at times in this chapter, he will leave food for Victor to keep Victor alive so that Victor can continue the chase trying to kill him. He leaves marks on trees and on stones. He'll carve messages to Victor, taunting him. The monster, it's really powerful writing here, is the monster, even though Victor's trying to kill it, the monster will never actually try to get away from Victor. He'll never let Victor catch him, but he also won't try to get away because he wants, and you got to think in kind of some sick way, for the monster, he's finally getting what he wants. He's finally getting the attention of his creator. This is how he finally gets Victor to acknowledge him, through vengeance, by chasing him in this incredible scene. And so we do have this incredible chase scene that is laid out here with all the steps the monster is doing to keep Victor alive. And that brings us up to Robert Walton's boat. Victor arrives in the Arctic. He gets a sled of dogs. He's driving the sled of dogs. All of them but one die. He's left stranded in the Arctic. And that's when we come to the point where Walton comes upon him, and Walton brings him onto his boat. And when you see in this chapter where it says Walton in continuation, this is where Victor's frame story ends. This is where Victor's done talking. And now all of a sudden, when we pick up here, Walton in continuation, this is Robert Walton now writing to his sister, Margaret, about what has happened after. And so Walton picks up here. Walton's like, look, here's your epistolary knowledge, by the way. Yet I own to you that the letters of Felix and Safie, which he showed me, and the apparition of a monster seen from our ship, He is including, Robert Walton sends this manuscript to his sister Margaret Saville, and in the manuscript, he includes the letters of Felix and Safie, as if to say, my dear sister, you probably wouldn't believe the story if I didn't have letters to prove it. And so he's actually including letters. This is what this, we talk about the epistolary text, a story partially told through letters. He has these letters that we've seen throughout the text, and he's including them in the manuscript that he's sending to his sister. Um, he's and Walton's like, I myself would not have believed this story had I not seen the monster from our ship and come across these letters. And so it's interesting here as well. Frankenstein, Walton says to his sister, Victor discovered that I was making notes concerning his history. He asked to see them and then himself corrected and augmented them in many places, but principally in giving life and spirit to the conversation he held with his enemy. It's interesting that Victor Frankenstein, at one point, Victor Frankenstein sees that Walton is writing down these notes, that he's writing down Victor's history, and Victor asks to see it and changes things. And it's one of the fun discussions when you read Frankenstein, and we've done this in college classrooms before, to try to figure out, what do we think Victor changed? Obviously Victor probably amended part of his story to make it more sympathetic to himself, but we do know that Victor has changed something in the text, which only adds the unreliable narration piece. And so, it goes on here. He continues to write to his sister. He reflects on Victor and what a great guy he thinks Victor was, as Victor's slowly declining in the cabin. He writes some more letters to his sister. Let's see here. And after hearing Victor's story, Robert Walton does change. As he's stuck in the North, stuck in the Arctic, after hearing Victor's story, Robert Walton does realize, that everything he's doing is not worth death. It's not worth dying for. Remember that the text began with him saying to his sister and saying to Victor in letter 4, I would be willing to give my life to make some great discovery. However, by the end of Victor's story, the die is cast. I have consented to return if we are not destroyed. At this point, Robert Walton realizes, maybe it's not a good idea to risk my life. He does turn the boat around, and he does learn. He is like the wedding guest from the Ancient Mariner. He learns his lesson. He becomes a wiser man. He turns the boat around to save his own life. And so Walton does learn from Victor's story, which I think was the important part of Victor's story. Let's see here. Let's see. And so in the end, Victor is sick on Walton's ship. Here we go. And as Victor is on Walton's ship, Victor slowly wastes away. The grief and everything he has been through is too much for him. The journey, searching for the monster, going on this epic journey is too much. And Victor does die. He dies right there on Robert Walton's boat. He dies of grief. He cannot go on. And the novel comes to an end. There's Victor's body in Walton's cabin as Walton is turning the boat around. And Walton one day hears voices in the cabin. I entered the cabin where lay the remains of my ill-fated and admirable friend. Over him hung a form which I cannot find words to describe, gigantic in stature yet uncouth and distorted in its proportions. As he hung over the coffin, his face was concealed by long locks of ragged hair, but one vast hand was extended, in color, apparent texture like that of a mummy. When he heard the sound of my approach, he ceased to utter exclamations of grief and horror, and sprung towards the window. Never did I behold a vision so horrible as his face. So as Walton comes in the cabin, what does he discover? But he discovers Victor's monster in the cabin with Victor's dead body, crying over the body. It's weird to think about the last time we see this monster in this text, he is weeping over the dead body of Victor that caused him such fate, caused him such pain throughout the story. But, you know, Victor is this monster's father. And no matter how poorly Victor treated the monster is obviously going to feel that. And with Victor's death, the monster now has no other connection to this world. Um, let's see here. The monster does say, "That's my last victim. I will kill no more. Oh, Frankenstein, generous and self-devoted being. What does it avail that I now ask thee to pardon me?" In these final moments of the novel, the monster looks down on the dead body of Victor and he's like, "I ask you to pardon me, Creator, for the havoc that I wreaked upon your family." Um, okay. And so we start to come to the end of the novel here. Let's see here. Um, the monster here finishes up his narration. Um, Once I falsely hoped to meet with beings who, pardoning my outward form, would love me for the excellent qualities which I was capable of unfolding. I was nourished with high thoughts of honor and devotion, but now crime has degraded me beneath the meanest animal. No guilt, no mischief, no malignity, no misery can be comparable to mine. When I run over the frightful catalogue of my sins, I cannot believe that I am the same creature whose thoughts were once filled with sublime and transcendent visions of beauty and the majesty of goodness. But it is even so. The fallen angel becomes the most malignant devil. Look at the Satan reference there. The monster, the fallen angel there is Satan. If you remember back from Paradise Lost, he's like, even the best angel fell and became the most malignant devil. That is what has happened to me. I am Satan. I was born good. I brought the wood to DeLacy's house. I sang with the birds. I was an innocent and good monster. But even the fallen angel becomes a malignant devil. I was turned by these events into the dead, and I am alone. I am the monster. I'm alone. I will have no other like me. The monster does resolve here that he's going to head off. In the end here, the monster realizes there's no one else in the world that will accept him. And so the monster decides he's going to head off to the Arctic to die alone. He's going to head off to the Arctic to ascend a funeral pyre, a huge fire, and he's going to burn himself. He's going to burn himself to death. Um, Fear not that I shall be the instrument of future mischief. My work is nearly complete. The monster is saying to Robert Walton, "Don't worry. No one will ever hear from me again. I'm going to perform this sacrifice. I shall quit your vessel on an ice raft which brought me hither, and shall seek the most northern extremity of the globe. I shall collect my funeral pile and consume to ashes this miserable frame, that its remains may afford no light to any curious or unhallowed wretch who would create another as I have been. I shall die. I shall no longer feel the agonies which now consume me, or the prey of feelings unsatisfied yet unquenched. He is dead who called me into being, and I shall be no more. The very remembrance of us both must speedily vanish. I shall no longer see the sun." Okay, so the monster's like, "Farewell, I leave you, and in the last of humankind, to those eyes will ever behold." And then in the final moments of the text, the monster addresses his creator. "Farewell, Frankenstein. If thou wert alive and yet cherished a desire of revenge against me, it would be better satiated in my life than in my destruction. But it was not so. Thou didst seek my extinction, that I might not cause greater wretchedness. And if yet, in some mode unknown to me, thou hast not ceased to think and feel, thou wouldst not desire against me vengeance greater than that which I feel. Blasted as thou wert, my agonies are superior to mine." The monster in his final soliloquy to Victor, to the dead body of Victor, he's like, "Just so you know, Victor, my struggles were worse than yours. But soon I shall die, and what I now feel no longer felt. Soon these burning miseries will be extinct. I shall ascend my funeral pile triumphantly, and exult in the agony of the torturing flames. The light of that conflagration would fade away. My ashes will be swept into the sea by the winds. My spirit will sleep in peace. Or if it thinks, it will surely not think thus. Farewell." And the monster springs from Walton's boat and disappears into the night, into history, into our study in AP Lit. And that, ladies and gentlemen, brings an end to my discussion of the chapters of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. I hope this finds you well. I hope you enjoy this last chapter. The writing is amazing. Again, email me if you have any questions. And I will record another video that talks about themes and stuff like that, a discussion video for the end of this unit so we can talk about some of the bigger ideas. Other than that, I will see you around.